Um, I'm still, thinking about what the previous speaker just spoke about, uh, place healing, and that's going to be a conversation that we have to keep thinking about, not forgetting the lessons of the past. And I know I'm I keep thinking I'm 1/10 of the experts that all of you are, but I do believe that there are some things that I've been working on that I want to share, and hopefully can continue that work after the pandemic as well. So the future safe aspect of urbanization largely deals for me with um, these three things, which is the aspect of social networks, the aspect of seeing critical infrastructures through physical spaces, and also emergency preparedness. And it's weird because for decades urban planners in India have been saying we need wide sidewalks, and almost always it's considered that it's like a aesthetic thing. But more now than ever, sidewalks have become like the emergency place to go, or the roads have become adapted uh, for emergency preparedness. So a thought kept arising, why not redefine public spaces from the funding perspective, from the health perspective, as a critical infrastructure? So a little about what I do with Design Trust is because the model that they adopted really looks at long-term policy implementations through short-term pilots and testing, and that happens in phases. So they work in collaboration with governments, project partners, community groups, and advisory committees. So each project will have a specific set of fellows and goals who work in tandem. So that way you have new MOUs signed, which never happened before, or new ways of looking at public space design or resiliency as a whole. So that way groups that didn't before have the time to sit together and decide, get to do that. A good example of this is the L space that we did. Obviously it started way before I joined, but it's interesting because it happened in phases, and right now the Department of Transportation has adopted this as a policy. And it really started by looking at how infrastructure such as the flyover can become, for example, a drain pipe that filters into a planter box. Like the runoff from the flyover is most often wasted, and how can these spaces also become more inviting and fill in the lack of space in New York City? And we also did something in called Future Culture in Staten Island, wherein we asked the cultural community, which is a term coined for this project, which meant people who lived, worked, and contributed to the community, because community itself has many definitions. So cultural community sort of helped talk about the past, present, and the future of the North Shore, and the ways in which prior projects have worked and who worked with them. So it became like a continuous collection of these points on a map, like the ones that you see on this. So when I think about all my experience here, and I think about my work in Chennai, or my responsibility as an Indian to contribute to some of the work in Chennai, I always think of the pain points that are currently present. Chennai is really populated right now, and according to the urban design guidelines that the country follows, even the minimum requirement of open space per person is not met. And if you compare this with 1.81 square meter with New York or London, you can see how big the difference is. And of course, our largest public space is the beach in itself. So it's very important that right to access and the urban commons is especially, managed well. So when I think about future space, you cannot think about it without these aspects of water, safety, accessibility, and urban commons, and more importantly now health. Another way by which governments are trying to strengthen their capacities is through the aspect of local self-governance and strengthening the urban local bodies, which have played a huge role in to crisis, because they are able to reach inner neighborhoods which the state and central government cannot reach in terms of aids and resources. But it's become more and more clear that the capacity training or the decentralized nature of these institutions have sort of handicapped these institutions from doing their best. And one of the ongoing discussions in this side of the world is how do we strengthen these local institutions and make them more decentralized. And by building this place coalition, it's possible to build, like connectivities within groups that would have otherwise not, like shared their resources. And this has been seen in like the digital divide that's in the US, how some people are able to work from home and some students are not able to. So the University of Tennessee, like coordinated with the city's public utility company, and they helped create drive up Wi-Fi sites. And concept of shared use agreements is another one that has been adopted in many places, where a space can be shared after hours, or a gym or a library can be shared by the community after these schools shut down. And these provide safe spaces in India, particularly because there's a lack of public spaces, yes, but there's also concerns with safety, which in turn affects workforce participation, which in turn reduces the contributions that women can have in the society. So before even building, pretty beautified places, the city really does not have much to provide in terms of funding when it comes to these very basic policy and infrastructural change. And recently in 2019, it was a shock when I was here in New York and Chennai had announced Day Zero. And it's a man-made disaster. Like, we managed the lands that were supposed to be wetlands in a way that caused floods and droughts at the same time. And rivers were polluted by industries that, despite having laws prohibiting it, continue to do it. So fishing communities have been at the forefront of these resilience, these environmental aspects of the cities. So these images really, want shock you, and you ask yourself, like, why has man-made disaster sort of like, become worse over the past few years because of lack of oversight. And some of these, I can also share this database that I'm collecting right now, but it's essentially some of the places that I've been collecting to make a point that, these playgrounds or public spaces or streets are in fact critical. So, for example, all across India, stadiums and playgrounds are converted into markets and isolation wards. And you have the Indian Railways recently converted like 50% of its coaches to have isolation wards too, because of the constant flow of migrant population from different villages. They sort of like isolate them in the railways itself. And these are creative, intelligent ways. But had we sort of imagined these in a prior, future, it could have been like done a little more effectively, and maybe we would have more space for those who cannot afford it. And the last part of this conversation, I really want to just quickly do a little plug, which is I'm crowdsourcing this data, which means I wanted to reach as many people in India as possible so that this can become a collective effort and become a report. So this is basically collecting all of the locations in India across different states and looking at what kind of spaces are converted into a critical infrastructure. So most often these are sports arenas, government buildings, they are railway coaches, and then we have public parks that are changed into farmers market, which has never happened before. And we also have transit hubs that also become fruit and vegetable markets. So it's a very interesting data to collect. And use spaces that can be shared for other purposes past school hours or college hours are now being in fact used 24/7. So I think in the future, institutional governance, resilience in terms of water management and its urban commons is going to be very critical. And building that place coalition is something that um, cities across the world can, strengthen. And I think that's one of the core themes that I keep bringing up in all of my writings as well. So yeah, I'm going to end it there because we can start talk about more during our roundtable discussion.